Welcome to Congregation Va-Dor's Touch of Torah. This evening, it is July 12th, and we're so pleased to have Rabbi Barry back with us this week. And we are going to be talking about the parsha of Balak in Numbers. Very interesting story. I'm sure you know it, and it's got some powerful statements within. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rabbi Barry to let us in on the secrets of Balak.
Very much. So yes, we're reading from the parsha called Balak. He was the king of Moab. The Jews had been released from Egypt. They got the wind at their back and God at their side. And so they're doing pretty well militarily. And they're moving through on their way to the promised land. And the king of Moab is very nervous. He's seeing that the Jewish people are very tough adversaries. They got God on their side. And he says to his people, these people are like an ox. They're going to lick us clean and they're going to wipe us out. So we need to do something to protect ourselves. So they hire this guy who's a professional hexologist. He can put a hex on people. And so they resort to magic. And his name is Balaam, or in Hebrew, Balaam. So Balaam, they approach him with a lot of wealth, and they say, hey, Balaam, we need you to put the curse on the Jewish people. They're going to come and destroy us, and we'll give you a bunch of money if you will curse them. So Balaam says, I'd like to accommodate you, but I can't just say a curse if it's not something that's coming from my heart, and I'm speaking for God. So what God tells me to say, that's what I say. So they say, okay, whatever, sure. But if you say something bad about the Jewish people, we'll give you a lot of money. So he says, okay, here's what you need to do. Make a few sacrifices, come with me up to a sacred place, and then I'll do my thing. So they do that. And he says nice things about the Jewish people. So Balak says, wait a minute, you don't get it. You're supposed to say bad things about the Jewish people. That's what we're paying you for. And he says again, no, you don't get it. I can't say anything unless the Spirit comes upon me and I'm speaking for God. So they try again, the same thing happens. So this time they're really upset. They said, look, we'll give you like 20 houses. We'll give you all types of gold and silver. We'll give you so much wealth. You won't know what to do with it. Just say something bad about the Jews. So he says, well, I'll tell you what, come up with me up on this mountain. We'll look down upon the Jewish people. And whatever I'm moved to say, I will say. All right, we'll try again. They figure, we'll keep trying. If we offer enough money, maybe he'll do the right thing. So they go up to the mountain. They look down upon the Jewish people. And according to the Torah, the Jewish people were dwelling peacefully with their families in a very loving way. And Balaam looks out upon them and says, Ma tovu alecha Yisrael mishkanotecha ben Yaakov. And how goodly are your tents, O Israel. Your communities are peace. And then he says, a whole bunch of blessings for Israel. You will triumph over your enemies. You will enjoy a wonderful future. You will do well in the promised land. All these blessings. And then he issues curses upon Israel's enemies. Well, this really infuriated them. You would think they would just kill the guy, but they didn't. They just walked off very forlorn. And then they kept their money, of course. And Balaam was considered, even though he wasn't Jewish, he was considered a prophet of God. So it's a beautiful story with an important lesson. There have always been anti-Semites, and they've always wanted to say bad things about the Jews. And the Jewish people have wondered, what do we do about these people? Well, this story offers one way of dealing with it. If the Jewish people live a good life of love and harmony and convey good, positive messages, we can turn enemies around who are prepared to say bad things, and we can get them to say good things. That's the lesson I derive, is that one, but it's not a universal message. It works with some people, and it works sometimes. If you have somebody who's implacable evil, like the Nazis or the Spanish Inquisition, they couldn't care less how loving you are or what you're doing. Sometimes you have to fight back. But with other people, if they're not that entrenched, who tend to think bad things about the Jews, we can turn them around by showing them love and setting an example of what we're all about. Now, I want to share with you a postscript of this passage. If you think about it, Balaam was an incredibly righteous person. He was offered untold wealth, and all he had to do was just say something he didn't believe. He just had to say bad things about the Jews. He would have been an extremely wealthy man, and he refused. Today, we see people in politics, they're offered a campaign check, and they'll say anything you want. It doesn't matter. What they believe is irrelevant. Just give them a little check, and you own them. So Balaam has achieved a very high level of righteousness in the eyes of anybody. But there's a problem in the Torah. The problem is that some verses later, it talks about the Jews dealing with the Moabites, the people that hired Balaam, Balak, the king of the Moabites. And later on, maybe partly because of this curse, the Jews have their way with the Moabites and the Midianites, their allies, and destroy them. And one of the people it mentions that was destroyed and killed was Balaam. Now you got a problem. We call this psychologically cognitive dissonance. You just said that Balaam did all these great things. He must have been a good guy. And now you're saying the Jews killed him and that this was ordered by God? This sounds horrible. What kind of people would do such a thing? So what the Orthodox do in this case, they have an escape clause or a way of reconciling it. It's called Midrash. What's a Midrash? These are stories made up completely out of thin air by rabbis a long time ago to try to reconcile the irreconcilable. So what's in the Midrash? Well, it's not in the Torah. It wasn't written at the time, but maybe 1,500 years later, some rabbi says, oh, you know what? Balaam did horrible things, X, Y, and Z. He did a whole bunch of terrible things. That's why he was killed. Well, where is it in the Torah? If he did these things, why doesn't the Torah mention it? Well, it's Midrash. So Midrash is just completely made up stories that try to reconcile things in the Torah. What really happened is the Torah was written by a lot of different people. It wasn't written by God, otherwise it would be consistent. But a lot of people, and there was all these different legends. One legend had Balaam as a great hero, another as a bad guy, and then they got squished together in the Torah. So the Midrash tries to work things out. So that's the story of Balaam. The most important message is the best way to deal with anti-Semitism is to be the best people we can be and do the right thing and love our families and make this world a better place. And for goodness sake, build bridges with the outside world and don't be clannish. If they're saying that the Jewish people just stick to themselves and they don't like to mix it up with others, the worst we could do is to stay to ourselves and not mix it up with others. So we should be very unified as Jews and cling to our Jewish traditions, but that should not make us isolationists. That to me is the moral of this story. And I open it up now for anybody to share some thoughts, comments, or questions. Go ahead, Sharon.
You left out the beginning of the story, which I happen to like. I guess Balak is traveling to the Jewish people, to the Moabite community, and he's riding on the donkey. So do you want to tell a little bit about that part of the parsha?
Yeah, that's it's actually Balaam, the prophet. The prophet, he's traveling on his donkey to get to the Moabites. So he's on his way on his donkey, and suddenly the donkey sees in front of him like this huge guy with a sword, and he looks very aggressive. And so the donkey sees this, and he moves to the side to go around him. And he goes to the side. There's like it's a fairly narrow road. He goes to the side and he kind of squeezes against the wall. And the Balaam, who's riding the donkey, gets really ticked off. Like, what are you doing? You're scraping on my leg. It hurts. So he beats the donkey. So then he goes a little further, and again he sees the same guy, and he's standing there on his way again. And same thing happens, and he beats the donkey. And so the donkey then turns to Balaam, and he says, what's the matter with you? Why are you doing that? He says, because you're stubborn, you're going into a wall. So he says to Balaam, he goes, hey, look, Balaam, I've been your loyal donkey for years. I don't normally just walk you into walls and do things that harm you. I've been a really good, loyal servant of yours. Can't you get it through your thick head that if I'm doing this, there must be a reason? I must have some reason. Don't you even care? He says, what's the reason? He says, there was an angel of God in front of me, and I avoided him. And then the angel shows up and verifies his presence. And I think what the story is trying to tell us is that even the most perspicacious people, a prophet of God, they still don't have crystal clear vision, and they still miss a lot of things. And many times the simple things, like an animal is more in tune with nature and can see things that we miss, sometimes can open up our eyes. And that we should always have our eyes open and be willing to see revelations. And we shouldn't think that we're so high and mighty that nobody can tell us things. Like if you're in an exalted position, you shouldn't let it go to your head and think, I know everything. Because even a donkey can see things that you don't see. But yeah, it's a very funny story. And the donkey gets up and starts talking. It's pretty amusing. All right. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Valerie.
I know a lot of asses that talk.
Yes, that's right. Well, what I like to say is that this story is really about American politics. It's all about a talking ass, but I'm not supposed to be political, so I won't. All right. Anybody else?
Rabbi, I was just going to say she kind of took my punchline, but you always put a title on each parsha, and
Yeah.
mine is always for this one. Who's the ass now? Is my title for this one. I did find the bartering back and forth about whether he could go or not go, and say this but don't say that, but only go if I tell you can go, and then getting mad that he went. I found that a little, I don't know, circuitous and difficult to follow. And I kind of likened it to God hardening Pharaoh's heart, just kind of not the heart part, but just the fact that it's kind of a confusing tale that makes you think, why would God, put him in that position and then let him go and then smite him and, all that type of stuff.
No, you're right about that, because God, when he has the confrontation with the donkey and the angel's like upset with him because he's going. And it's like, why are you going to say bad things about the Jewish people? But you're right. Balaam had discussed this, and God said, go ahead. You got my blessings. Go ahead. He submits to the guy. God says, go ahead. And then all of a sudden he's like upset because he's going. So it doesn't really explain why all that well. The story doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you get the sense that God is saying, okay, go ahead if you want to. But then when he goes, he says, but why did you? You knew that these people were up to no good. You know that these people want to pay you to say something bad. So yeah, I didn't tell you not to go, but you knew it wasn't a good idea. It's almost like you have a parent, and the parent's telling the kid, don't go out to this party there's going to be drinking there, but I'm not going to stop you. I'm not telling you you can't go. I'm just saying it's not a good idea because I want you to be free to do what you want. Then the kid goes, and then the father gets upset, maybe does something like some kind of punishment. So you're right that the punishment doesn't make sense because he said, if you want, go ahead. It is an interesting aspect of the story. Anybody else?
Rabbi, is this sort of the beginning of anti-Semitism?
No, it's really not the beginning at all. You know, before this, if you want a classic example of anti-Semitism, you look at Egypt, all right? Egypt's the classic. So Joseph comes in, he saves all of Egypt, and the Pharaoh's grateful. And the Pharaoh says, I'm going to give you choice land, bring your family, and you can settle in Egypt. Then what happens? A few generations later, the Torah says, there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. That's anti-Semitism. The Jewish people saved the country, and then he forgets about it. How could he not know Joseph? Joseph saved Egypt. He was the second in command to Pharaoh. He knew Joseph. He knew who the Jewish people were. He knew all about them. He just chose to ignore it. This is what happened countless times in Europe. The Jews would come into a country, they would build it up, they would do great things, and then the native population would say, well, wait a minute, they've got all this wealth. Why do we need them? Let's just kill them or expel them, and we'll take everything they got. And who are these people that have all this wealth? Usually it's a Christian country, and they believe, well, we're Christian, and God loves the Christians. He doesn't like the Jews. How did they do better than us when we're the ones that are now the new chosen people? And it got them nervous. Well, maybe the Jews still are the chosen people. And so let's just take all this stuff and get rid of them. So this is a perennial problem. They know not Joseph is something that happened in Egypt and has happened throughout Jewish history. But there's another aspect of it also. In the Torah, the book of Exodus, it says that the Egyptians said, we need to deal wisely with the Jewish people. They're multiplying out of control. They're extremely powerful. And before you know it, they're going to take us over. This magnification of the Jewish people and their nefarious influence, and there being a foreign influence, and they're going to take over and do horrible things. It's never, ever happened, but it's always an accusation. So the anti-Semitism was very much in play in the Egyptian story. This one, I don't attribute this to anti-Semitism. If you put yourself in the head of Balak, the head of Moab, the Jews are moving through and they're mowing people down and wiping them out. They're just obliterating nations before their eyes. So Balak had very, very good reason to be concerned, separate apart from anti-Semitism. He doesn't give the impression that he's anti-Semitic. He just gives the impression like he wants his nation to survive because he thinks the Jews are going to wipe him out. So that I wouldn't attribute to anti-Semitism, but it's actually the flip side. Balaam is philo-Semitic. He loves the Jewish people. He loves them so much. He looks down on them and sees them living in peace and says very nice things about him, even though he was offered a lot of money to say bad things. So I also take that to mean that anti-Semitism is alive and well, but it's not ubiquitous. There's some Jewish people who think everybody hates us. And that simply is not true. We have plenty of enemies and plenty of people that hate us, but to suggest that everybody does and everybody always will, this story refutes that, and that's not true either. Yes, Sharon.
So the story of Purim, what time frame would that have been? Because that definitely was anti-Semitic.
Yeah, big time.
So
yeah.
where would that be in relationship to Egypt, to the Egyptian? Before?
That's a good question. So the Egyptian bondage, slavery in Egypt, was roughly around 1250 BCE. So this was in the very, very, very beginning of the Jewish people. Because remember, there was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the first Jews, and then Jacob and his family went into Egypt because of a famine with Joseph, his son, and then there was supposedly 400 or 430 years, and then there were slaves in Egypt. So this was in the very beginning of the Jewish people. Then they go out in the Exodus and they end up in the Promised Land. In the Promised Land, they establish hegemony. They have their own nation, which achieved its pinnacle under King David. Then you have the kingdom divided up into two, the northern and the southern kingdom, and they're fighting with each other. And that's the beginning of the end. Whenever Jews fight with each other, that's the beginning of the end. And then they succumbed to various empires. The Assyrians take away the 10 tribes. Assyrians come in. Then the Babylonians come in. And then they have the Babylonian captivity. They destroy the temple and they bring people into Babylon. Then you have Persia. And the story of Purim takes place during the Persian Empire. Now, the Persians originally were very good to the Jews. King Cyrus was actually referred to by some Jews as the Messiah, the one who was the deliverer. He delivered them from Babylonian bondage, and he allowed the Jews to return from Babylonia. He took over Babylonia, said, go back and build your temple, have at it, with my blessings. Probably historically what happened is, what makes sense, is that the Persians probably approached the Jewish people and said, we know the Babylonians treated you horribly. We don't care for them either. So let's have an allegiance. We're going to go after them. We're going to take them out. You revolt against them, and we'll give you your land back, and you can go back. Because that's what they did in those days. They would form alliances. And probably that's what happened. So the Jews were treated very well by the Persians initially. And then the Jews lived under Persian rule, Persian occupation. And afterwards, it wasn't quite as rosy as it was then. Historians believe, and I hate to burst the bubble of everybody, but historians believe that the Purim story is completely fictional, that there's not a shred of evidence, total mythology, partly because Mordecai and Esther sound very like Marduk. They get from Marduk, who is the Persian god, Marduk to Mordecai. All you add is a yud. Marduk, Mordecai is the same. And their female goddess in Persian mythology was Ishtar. And to get from Ishtar to Esther is virtually the same. So you have two goddesses in the Persian theology, Marduk and Ishtar, and we have Mordecai and Esther. So, and there's other parallels too with mythology that I won't go into. So probably this story is pure cloth, but if it did happen, it would have been during the period of the Persian hegemony over that area, which was roughly around 450, 500 BCE. And then the Persians were followed by the Greeks. Greeks come in under Alexander the Great, takes over the Jewish people, but he was a real scholar and he was smart. He was a good leader. So when he came in, he said to the Jewish people, now you're going to be free. Just pay tribute to us and we'll grant you freedom and you can live under Greek rule and we can get along well. And they did. They did get along well with Alexander the Great because he appreciated Jewish history and Jewish culture. But his kids were the opposite. They were horrible rulers and did horrible things and then mistreated the Jews miserably. And one of them, Antiochus, tried to destroy the Jewish religion and just was a horrible leader and encouraged a revolt, which eventually was successful against the Greeks. And then after that, they the reason why the revolt partly was successful, they invited in the Roman Empire. There were two brothers, Aristobulus and Christobulus. These two were fighting with each other, and one of them brought in the Roman Empire. And when they brought in the Roman Empire in a civil war, the Roman Empire stayed, and the Jews ended up under the Roman occupation. And then, as you know, they revolted twice in 67 and then 135, and then the Romans just destroyed everything and exiled them for 2,000 years. So that kind of gives you a little overview of the history. The thing is, a lot of Jewish history is based in reality. I mean, we know these empires really existed, and we know a lot of these stories are based on reality, but a lot of the details didn't actually occur the way they're described.
Oh, it's very
Let's see.
interesting, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Perhaps people might enjoy having some kind of a Jewish historical program or something, a couple programs.
Yeah, well, of course, I gave a synopsis of all of Jewish history up to the
Right.
Romans in about 10 minutes. But yes, within these different empires, the very interesting question that actually applies to today is, how did the Jews accommodate themselves to living under foreign occupation when they dwelt among the Babylonians and the Persians and the Romans? What did they do? Did they just completely reject the outside world and just say, we're Jewish, we reject your culture and nothing to do with it? Did they assimilate and say, this is a dominant culture in the world, we should embrace that, Judaism is passé, it's primitive? Or did they try to work out a balance of retaining their Judaism and also being part of the greater empire? That conflict in Jewish life over the millennia sheds a lot of light on where we are today. Because where we are today is the exact same way that we were under the Romans and under the Persians and under different empires. And today we have the same conflict. The more right-wing, the Orthodox among us, tend to think more, we're Jews. We don't want to accommodate to this culture so much. The modern Orthodox have taken a different approach. We're Jews, but yes, we can accommodate. We can retain our Jewish traditions and still accommodate. But the typical Orthodox response was, our religion, our culture is far superior to yours. So we're glad to live here, but thanks, but no thanks. We'll go ahead and follow our customs, not yours. Modern Orthodox is a little break from that. But the Reform are very, very different indeed. The Reform have really embraced American culture. It's like, we love being Americans. We love American culture. We fight for freedom. We believe in equal rights. We believe in progressive causes. The Reform have tried to be Jewish and American all at the same time, and there's not a conflict between them. And the Conservative a little bit in between. So how to accommodate in that way has always been an issue. And it's an issue today too. And at Va-Dor and every synagogue, they're all dealing with that issue. How do we be Jewish and American at the same time? And usually there's not a problem, because usually both Judaism and America are fighting for the same thing. But you're right, Sharon, it's a really fascinating topic. The Jews living under Roman occupation, which took place for centuries, is fascinating. And the Jews living in the Middle Ages under the control of the Catholic Church and trying to deal with that, at times, horrific, terrible situation with pogroms and crusades and inquisitions, and how to accommodate that was horrible. And another interesting thing is the Jews living under the Muslim occupation, which was relatively good. The Jews did much better under the Muslims than under the Christians. Under the Christians, we were massacred repeatedly and exiled and tortured. It was a horrible thing. Under the Muslims, Jews did pretty well. They weren't treated equally. And there were times that the Muslim culture was worse than others. But by and large, like the great Maimonides achieved his peak under Muslim rule, where he was treated very well. And the Jews rose to high positions of power very often in Muslim countries. Today, it's the opposite. Today, the Muslim world has forgotten what happened before, especially because of Israel. Before Israel was established, Jews were doing relatively okay in the Arab world. Not great, but okay. But when Israel was founded, and with the Holocaust and the anti-Semitism, it's been a nightmare under Muslim rule right now. And it's a nightmare in Europe too, where the Muslims are moving into Europe and just causing hideous problems for the Jewish people. But I agree with you, Sharon. This is a very good topic, about how Jews lived in different occupations, because it sheds light on where we are right now.
Is anybody,
and-
anybody here? Would that be of interest to any of you if we had a class, a couple of classes on that?
Sharon, I'll tell you the best way to do it. Show a movie. All right. The movie is very entertaining and they can show it and explain a lot better than I can. Show a movie and let them and see what life was like. And then afterwards, we can follow it up with a little discussion. That's what I would recommend. And there's some good ones out there about the Jews living in different time periods. All right, so I think we should do that. Maybe at one of our Tuesday sessions, we could start out with if you can rig this up, I don't know, show a movie and then have a little discussion afterwards. Go ahead, Harris.
1 minute.
Of Israel.
You're unmuted now.
Before the creation of Israel, there were hundreds of thousands of Jews living in Muslim countries.
Yeah.
In Morocco, Tunisia, Yemen even had thousands of Jews living there. So they were all over the Muslim countries. And like you say, there was peace, Jewish neighborhoods, they could do whatever they wanted to do. And then Israel came along and that was the end of that. So that's what happened.
It was really, really sad because they had developed cultures based on living in harmony with the Muslims, and they were specifically Sephardic cultures. These cultures were obliterated. Just like in the Holocaust, you had European Jewish cultures and yeshivas that had existed for centuries, and then they were obliterated. And the same thing happened in the Arab world. And the Jews faced bitter persecution. I mean, they desperately wanted to, this was their home. They didn't want to go, but they were being hung and killed and tortured, and they were given no choice. And nobody knows about it, and most people don't really care.
Yeah, there's only about 3 Jews left in Egypt, where they used to have tens of thousands. So
yeah,
it's terrible.
That would be an interesting film also, to show what happened to those people. Yeah. All right. I think we've had a good discussion. I appreciate everybody joining with us. If you can, get over to Mariposa. We're doing some pretty good things over there, having a good time. And if you can, follow the lawsuit. You can see bits and pieces of it on our website. You can also see it on, I have a website now. And if you go to my website, you'll see a lot of stuff about the litigation and some other things as well. And my website and Va-Dor's website, I'm working on making them one. So if somebody hears about the lawsuit and they think, wow, that's really cool, I want to find out about this. Once they go there, they'll be linked to Va-Dor. And if somebody goes to Va-Dor, they'll be linked to see what we're doing in this lawsuit. There's also, there's all types of stuff about our philosophy, our religious philosophy at Va-Dor on the website, and they can learn about it. So check it out. You might enjoy it. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Yes.
Hi, is it possible for you to give us a short update on where the lawsuit is?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you an update. I'll start from the beginning. Va-Dor's board took a very courageous stance and said, we're in. We're going to be a plaintiff. I didn't realize just how courageous that was until I went to other synagogues and said, are you interested? They said, you got to be kidding me. And people in the congregation were enthusiastic. Let's go. But the boards and the boards of major Jewish organizations are scared. So anyway, the board said, yeah, we're in. I go to Planned Parenthood and ACLU, the 2 organizations that fought the hardest for abortion rights for the last 50 years based on right of privacy, not religion, privacy. I went to them and I said, let's work together and let's get rid of this terrible law in Florida. And they said, no. Religion is a sideshow. That's not the way to argue this. The way to argue it is right of privacy. It's worked for 50 years. So I said, well, I don't know if you noticed, but the United States Supreme Court just did away with the right of privacy and said it doesn't work. It doesn't even exist for abortion. So I think you're on the wrong side of history. And they didn't agree. And they said, we're going forward. And they urged me not to file or do anything until they had their shot, because they didn't want to get delayed, distracted, diverted. And I said, okay. So they did their thing and they went. They actually got an injunction from a trial judge, but he said this is never going to hold because the people above me, they're very conservative and they don't care about the right of privacy. And they're going to go with the US Supreme Court. And it's been overturned already. So the injunction was in place for a day. Meanwhile, I got my case. And what I've been trying to do is to get allies. I've gone to, spent a long time trying to get allies. I met this morning with a major law firm, a huge law firm that's led by a prominent Jewish attorney who's very involved in Jewish causes. And I met with him and some of his key players. And I said, I need you. We need to work together. And they said, we've done a lot of cases, but we're not really skilled in constitutional law. I said, don't worry, I am. I need you and your resources So we met, and they're going to get back to me in a few days. I've met with everybody, all these different Jewish organizations, NCJW, Hadassah, Ben the Ark, Jewish federations, the head of the Reformed Jewish movement, and others. So far, it's the same. Right on, you're doing a great job, but we're out. It's a little too controversial for them. I've met with other attorneys and other lesser Jewish organizations. I have some that are close and some that are interested. By Friday, I'm going to see who's in and who's out, and I'll be moving forward in earnest. I have an attorney, a very good attorney, who's been in front of the US Supreme Court, and he's in Israel right now, very, very devoted to Judaism and thrilled about this lawsuit. He's 100% behind it. But we've got incredible support for this lawsuit across the board. When I say that Jewish organizations haven't joined in as plaintiffs, that's true. But the Jewish people, the grassroots, they've been contacting us like in droves. They love what we're doing. So by Friday, I'm going to try to figure out who's in and who's out and move forward. I spent the last 4 days working on an affidavit. I stayed up all night, one night, half the night, 2 other nights. This affidavit sets forth Jewish law on abortion and when life begins, and shows that Jewish law is the exact opposite of Christian law. And if you impose Christian law, as this bill does in Florida, you have now criminalized Judaism. This affidavit is powerful, and it tracks Va-Dor. It explains what we think, what we believe, and how this law is offensive to our beliefs and to Jewish beliefs. I'm going to unleash this on the press, and I think it's going to wake up a few people. We've had national and international press a lot, and I've done interviews. You'll be seeing me on Washington Post, LA Times, other groups have done interviews. They'll be coming out. But when this comes out, and if there are other groups who are going to join us, and I announce that there's other attorneys, and by the way, I'm going to become a plaintiff myself personally, and I will have another attorney represent me because I can't represent myself. When all this comes out, it's going to be even bigger. And if I could get some really good attorneys working with me, I think we have an excellent chance of winning and setting precedent for the whole country, because we have a strong set of facts. One of the best facts that we have in Florida is that usually when they pass these anti-abortion laws, they try to hide the religious component because they don't want to be accused of violating separation of church and state by making it so obvious that, oh, this is somebody's religion, that's why they're doing it. They hide it. Not in Florida. We have a governor who's bold, brazen, and arrogant, and who wants to get on the good side of the fundamentalist Christians. So he unabashedly went into a church with a bunch of other people and the people who sponsored the bill, and they said, here we are, we're doing this because this is our religious mandate. And they expressed the religious influence clearly. That's going to get them into tons of hot water and litigation. It's a beautiful set of facts that we have, because they cannot hide the religious influence behind the law, which by itself should render it invalid. Yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi, the one group I thought it was from California, that it was a Jewish body that was kind of Reconstructionist, and they contacted us.
Ben the Ark.
Yeah, all
Yeah,
those
Ben the Ark.
people. Okay, so that's a congregation, plus it's an entity, part of Federation, I think, right?
Oh, no, that's Ikar. I think you're talking about Ikar.
No, not E-card, the other one, the guy that wrote last week. But I wanted to read just to a couple people,
ahead.
just so these are just a couple notes that we've got, and there's thousands of them. But dear Rabbi Silver, I offer my admiration and appreciation along with this small donation in response to your effort to support women's health and the recognition of their ability to make decisions regarding their own bodies. We saw you yesterday on the Katie Fang show and we're interested in your viewpoint. We really appreciate your efforts to fight against laws that are antithetical to the Jewish religion. We wish you well in all your endeavors. We are including a donation to the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund to help in any way you deem important. Take care and stay well. These are just two notes that came across that, you know, I wanted Rabbi to hear and I wanted you guys to hear, but they're all very, very powerful and people supporting what we're doing. Women's rights, religious freedom, you know, pro-abortion, et cetera. And, you know, it's right, we're right there.
It's amazing how the incredible reaction that we've got. But one thing that's different about this case that people really are gratified to see, that we're standing up for Jewish rights, that we're standing up for the Jewish people as our right to be Jews. And my goal in this lawsuit is to get all the denominations of Jews together behind this. There are organizations that represent all Jews that I've really tried to get them involved, but that's my goal.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
So I have this question. Is there case law precedents where religious law, so to speak, trumps with a small t, United States law?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah. Yeah. There's cases
So
like that all the time.
this is not novel.
Yeah, it's all the time. The United States, as their First Amendment, has the what we call the Establishment and the Free Exercise Clause. What that means is that the state can't establish a religion for the entire nation, and it can't prohibit the free exercise of religion for any one group. That's called the Free Exercise Clause. So what our allegation is in the complaint, they've established fundamentalist Christianity as the law of the land when it comes to abortion. Their view of when life begins and their view of when abortion is okay and when it isn't okay, they've now established that as the law of the land for everybody. And it's the opposite of what Jews do. And for Jews, the law is totally different. And now if we try to practice Judaism, we're criminals. So we can't exercise our right as Jews. And they've also established their law for everybody. The Free Exercise Clause saying you can't have a law which trumps or which prohibits someone from practicing religion. There's a body of case law on that since the beginning of time in the United States government. And the founding fathers, there's a quote by Madison, and he said something like, the separation of church and state is extremely important in the United States because we don't want the soil of America to be drenched in blood like it was in Europe. And so this concept of keeping the two apart is fundamental, and there's over 200 years of case law in which a group says your law prohibits my exercise of religion. Therefore, either two things happen. Either the entire law is just tossed out, or there's an exemption made for that particular religion. Now, some of the reporters have asked me, is that what you're looking for? Are you looking for a Jewish exemption? And I said, no. Jews aren't the only ones who don't practice fundamentalist Christianity. This law prohibits the free exercise of any religion other than theirs. Our goal is to have freedom for all people, atheists included, everybody. However, if there, as a fallback position, if the courts refuse to do that and said, okay, we're not doing it, but we're going to have what they call a carve out. We'll have a carve out for you guys. All right. You guys don't have to obey the law if you're Jewish. Everybody else does. I mean, it would be ridiculous. But if they did that, you know what would happen. The next day, a Muslim group would come in and say, hey, you know what? Well, our religion is different than theirs too. Me too. And then other Christians would come in and say, well, we're not like these guys. And then, so the carve out would still work. But it's a kind of a ridiculous way to do it in this case, because everybody has views different than the fundamentalist Christians, pretty much. But yes, there's great precedent for it. Sometimes it's very difficult, like you had the Santerias, right? So the Santerias in Miami, they had a law against cruelty to animals. And the Santerias, they go around because of stuff that they got from our Torah, unfortunately. And they start doing crazy things with chickens and slaughtering chickens in a bizarre manner. So the city said, you can't do that. It's cruelty to animals. And they say, well, this is our religion. You can't tell us not to practice our religion. They say, yeah, we are. And so they held them accountable. They fined them or penalized them or punished them. The Santerias had a very interesting defense. They said, what are you talking about? You're saying you can't slaughter animals? And that's cruelty? What do you think you guys do every day of the week? Don't you eat meat? I mean, when you eat meat, don't they slaughter animals? Haven't you noticed? The only difference is we're doing it in the open and you do it in private. But this is our religious right to do it. And the Santerias prevailed. Santerias prevailed. See, that's where you could have a carve out, because most religions don't go around slaughtering animals in public. They kind of went out of fashion about 3,000 years ago. So you could have a carve out because they're the only ones doing that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm not interested in the carve out really. But if there's a fallback, if I was either going to lose the case or go with the carve out, count me in. I'll go with the carve out.
Well, I can see if this thing gets really blown up, you're going to have a whole lot of conversions going on in this country.
Conversions to, oh yeah, the Jews got a carve out. Everyone would say, hey, I'm Jewish too. Yeah, sign me up. That's a good point. Yeah, I'm a Jew, right?
I mean, a lot of that they call originalism.
Yeah.
But aren't there those in the legal profession that don't subscribe to originalism? They legislate from the bench. So
you mean they kind of like create their own law?
Yeah. So why couldn't they do that with this case?
Okay, well, look, if the court rules according to the law, we will win easily. This clearly is a violation of separation of church and state. It clearly criminalizes the Jewish religion. It's clearly implementing a Christian view for everybody else. There's no doubt about it. The problem is the courts usually don't rule impartially, fairly, objectively. That's not how they rule. They rule based on who appointed them and what acts do they have to grind. In Florida, we have 3 people recently appointed to the Supreme Court who are the same as the ones that Trump appointed. They're fundamentalist Christians, and they're just going to rule against, well, most people think they're probably just going to rule against anybody who's challenging this law, because they were put there by DeSantis to do his bidding. The beauty of this case that I filed is that it's filed under something called RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This is a law that protects religious minorities, and it was specifically put there by fundamentalist Christians. It's their law. They created it, and the judges have always been supporting RFRA. I filed suit under RFRA, so they can't just toss it aside. So this court could actually do the right thing, because they just had this case, I don't know if you heard about it, in the Supreme Court with this football coach. So the football coach is running Christian prayers.
Yeah.
And they came after him and said, hey, you can't do that. You're violating church-state separation. And he said, I have the right to practice my religion. Well, the Supreme Court said, yeah, more power to you. And he's Christian. If they started to say, yeah, you could practice your religion, but the Jews, no, you can't. It's going to bring out the hypocrisy. And they might be forced into a situation where they're going to have to say, well, we just did it for these guys, so we got to do it. So I think there's a fairly decent chance that under this cause of action, even the conservative judges might go away. That's one of the beauties of filing under RFRA. The other thing I like
Can
about
you repeat what that RFRA means? Can you repeat that, please? I'm writing it down.
Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. So it's passed usually when, a long time ago when they were like liberal, they were complaining, oh, these liberal judges, they don't like Christianity, they're anti-Christian. We need to protect the Christian religion. So they passed this law so that the Christians could do their thing and not be harassed. And so it's in Florida. The beauty of it also is, if you're a plaintiff and you win, you get attorney's fees. Because remember, they were religious people trying to protect religion. So they said, and if you win, you get attorney's fees. But if you lose, you don't have to pay fees. So right now, I'm able to go to big firms and say, hey, you know what? If you come in, you can get your attorney's fees paid. Because one of the firm I was talking to, they said, well, we only do a certain amount of pro bono work. I said, this isn't pro bono. Think of this like a car accident case. All right. If you win, you hit the jackpot. if you win this case, you're going to get huge fees. And even if you don't, you're going to get a lot of good press. So that's called RFRA. That's what we filed under. The reason why the press is going crazy over this case, this is the first time that RFRA has ever been used in American history that we know of to protect abortion rights. It was only used in the past for other things, and abortion rights was always right of privacy. That's why the media is all over this case.
I was listening to a very interesting radio program, and they had several doctors on, OBGYNs, nurses, what have you. And what they were saying, quite frankly, that the court didn't realize how far-reaching this is. If someone has an ectopic pregnancy, a doctor cannot perform a surgical procedure that would save the woman's life. And what about in vitro, women that have in vitro fertilizations now? They're fertilizing eggs and freezing them. Do you have to have those eggs born? And what if it's not a viable egg and you have to destroy it? And so it's much, much more far-reaching than just abortion. And that was not even taken under advisement when they were making this type of a decision. And part of the medical profession is saying that lawyers and politicians have no medical background and have no business making decisions based on medical issues. I mean, there's a tremendous groundswell from the medical profession because it's preventing doctors literally from saving women's lives on a very valid, very logical, very necessary procedures that have to be done in addition to the in vitro fertilization conceect.
Well, you're
many women who want to have families now, they are not moving forward with any type of IV procedure who want to have families. You're actually stopping people from producing children by having this law.
You're exactly right. There's a lot of horrible consequences that they don't think about when they're in their zeal to pass these laws. Another one is the way the law is written is very peculiar, but let's say a Jewish woman realizes she has Tay-Sachs. Tay-Sachs usually can't be diagnosed before 15 weeks. So this law says after 15 weeks, too bad. So Tay-Sachs, she finds out, now in Tay-Sachs, the child is going to die an early death, usually within a year, right? So the law says this: if the child has a fatal fetal abnormality prior to viability, you can abort it. After viability, you can abort it. Why? Nobody knows. But so if they discover Tay-Sachs and they know that the fetus is going to die, but it's after viability, too bad. You got to bear the child and watch the child die. And there's a lot of horrible consequences to these laws. But you're right, Valerie. They didn't realize or they didn't care what they're doing. But if this law actually holds in place around the country, you're going to see ghoulish, nightmarish consequences all over the place. And we're going to have to save them from themselves by getting rid of this law. Thanks, everybody. I'll catch you next time. Try to catch us on Friday night.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye.